And now let's talk about the world's politics. Hopefully we do have the global news editor, Yuriy Fizer, who joins me now. Nice to see you, Yuriy.
Nice to see you, Volodymyr.
So what has happened in the whole world the last week?
Well, there were quite a few meetings all around the globe, and what is very important, that Ukraine was at the spotlight and all of them. Initially, the EU ministers of foreign affairs and EU ministers of defense met in Brussels to discuss European issues, and they talked about Ukraine also. And then, far from Ukraine, at the Indonesian island of Bali, leaders of the so-called G20 group met also to discuss different global issues, but Ukraine was also at the agenda. And Putin had to be there, but he didn't come. Maybe he was afraid to, I don't know, but nevertheless, I would suggest to call this group G19 instead of G20, and maybe it's even in time to exclude Russia from this group.
Maybe. But let's talk about G20 a bit later. And now let's draw our attention to the support of Ukraine from the European countries.
Yes, I have to say that Ukraine has got assurances of full support from the European Union. The ministers almost unanimously, with the exception of only the representatives of Hungary, confirmed that they will continue to provide us with the necessary military, financial and humanitarian support so that we can successfully resist Russian aggression. However, some unclear messages were also heard from Europe. For example, head of European diplomacy, Josep Borrell, before the beginning of the meeting of the foreign ministers in Brussels, said that the European Union is not yet ready to introduce new anti-Russian sanctions. And so, why did he say this? What's on the stake? I asked this to the special correspondent of Radio Free Europe and Radio Liberty, Rikard Jozwiak, and this is what he answered in the exclusive interview to the Spotlight Ukraine. Mr. Jozwiak, greetings and thanks for joining me today.
Greetings, nice for having me.
My first question to you would be as follows. So, the European People's Party, the largest faction of the European Parliament, said in the statement that at the plenary session that will start in Strasbourg on November 21st, deputies plan to vote on the resolution that would call Russia a terrorist state. So, the question is, do you think other deputies will support this resolution?
Yes, I think so. The European Parliament is quite strong when it comes to support for Ukraine. They're also freer to say these sort of things because they don't have the same, let's say, skin in the game. What the European Parliament are allowed to say things that, for example, EU member states and the European Commission, for example, can't say. Because they have bigger diplomatic clout. The European Parliament, essentially, when it comes to foreign policy, don't take any binding decisions, which means that they can be a bit more offensive. So I think that the European Parliament will pass a resolution calling Russia exactly this.
And do you know, by the way, the exact day when this resolution can be voted?
That will be on the Thursday, so I don't have a calendar in front of me, but what will that be, the 24th, potentially?
Okay, so I hope the resolution will be voted for. Okay,
I'm pretty sure it will pass.
Josep Borrell, the head of European diplomacy, sat in Brussels before the beginning of the meeting of the ministers of foreign affairs of countries members of the European Union. He said that the EU is not yet ready to discuss introducing new sanctions against Russia. What can this statement mean?
It means that there is a reality in the European Union that you need unanimity to pass sanctions. Everyone, all 27 EU member states must agree. And he knows that there is, among a minority of member states, a feeling that they don't want to push even further with sanctions right now. The vast majority of member states want to go further, list people who should have their assets frozen, who should get a visa ban, perhaps move to fill a few loopholes in the sanctions and so on. But at the moment, there is not the 100% appetite. So they are working towards what would be the 9th package of EU sanctions. I think there is still a fairly big chance that this will be agreed before Christmas. But you still have to work a bit harder to convince everyone to agree on this.
So speaking about this minority, they don't want new sanctions against Russia just at the moment, or they don't want new sanctions at all?
I think it's a combination, but mainly they don't want any new sanctions at all. We all know that Hungary is the country that is most vociferous in their sort of opposition to new sanctions. They think that sanctions don't work. They claim that sanctions, if they were effective, should have stopped the war immediately. So they are not in favor of new sanctions. I think, however, which have been the case with Budapest for the last 2-3 sanction rounds, that as long as you don't touch energy, and especially Russian energy going to Hungary, which means atomic energy, gas, and to a certain extent oil, that they will be okay with sanctions in the end. But as you know, then the sanctions will be very weak. The last 2-3 packages from the EU has made have not been the strongest one, and I think we will continue to see these sort of more sanctions, but they will not be sanctions that substantially hit the Russian economy.
Exclusive interviews also in Spotlight Ukraine. And now let's talk about G20 as one of the main topics which has been discussed all over the world for the last couple of weeks. What was said about Ukraine in Indonesia?
Well, I have to say, Volodymyr, that Ukraine was one of the main topics at G20 summit in Indonesia. Our issue was so important that Putin did not even come, maybe because he was scared to come, or maybe something else, I don't know. But his foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov, although he came, managed to stay there only for a day, and then he fled away. And all because most of the leaders condemned Putin's war in Ukraine. In the final declaration, they called this war terrible, even though Lavrov managed to convince the participants to add a sentence saying that not all the leaders agreed with the conclusion of the declaration. Putin was also urged to stop the war immediately and withdraw all his troops from Ukraine. What's more, everyone present did not mince words when describing the rocket attack against Ukrainian cities on Tuesday. And this is what, for example, said the President of the United States of America, Joe Biden.
At the moment when world leaders here in Bali are seeking to make progress on global peace, Putin is striking civilian targets and children and women. And, I mean, it's almost, in my words, not yours, barbaric what he's doing. And Russia can and should stop the war. They're able to do it. They could stop it tomorrow if they wanted to. But I'm glad we're on the same page.
And now Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister of Great Britain. Let's hear what he said at the G20 summit.
While other world leaders were working together to tackle the greatest challenges our people face, Putin was launching indiscriminate attacks on civilians in Ukraine. In the wake of these attacks, today we held an urgent meeting of allies to underscore our solidarity with Ukraine and Poland. We should all be clear, none of this would be happening if it weren't for Russia's invasion of Ukraine. This is the cruel and unrelenting reality of Putin's war. As long as it goes on, it poses a threat to our security and that of our allies. And as long as it goes on, it will continue to devastate the global economy.
And Volodymyr, from what we have just heard, maybe it's even good Putin did not come to G20 summit. Good for him, at least.
Yeah, and good for the whole world. But not only G20 because this week there were like more summits in Asia as well. Were the people and the politicians in those summits talk about Ukraine?
Yes, representatives of the Association of the Southeast Asian Nations met in Cambodia, and even there they talked about Ukraine. Moreover, our Minister of Foreign Affairs, Dmytro Kuleba, was there. He addressed the meeting, but more about this in our story.
Ukraine joined the Association of Southeast Asian Nations Summit and a parallel East Asian Summit for the first time. Leaders of the United States, Japan, South Korea and Australia are among those also attending. At the summit, Ukraine Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba signed the Treaty of Amity and Cooperation in Southeast Asia, a peace pact among Southeast Asian countries established by ASEAN founding members and discussed during meetings with Southeast Asian leaders ways in which they can support Ukraine. Kuleba also urged Southeast Asian countries to take all measures possible to stop Russia from playing Hunger Games over a Ukrainian Black Sea grain deal.
I called on all ASEAN members to take every measure possible to stop Russia from playing Hunger Games with the world. Grain corridor should be exempted from the conflict. Whatever happens on the battleground, Russia should not use this corridor as a blackmail, as a leverage in international relations.
ASEAN partner status opens up a number of new opportunities for Ukrainian business, in particular in the fields of digital transformation, pharmaceuticals, agriculture and mechanical engineering. Now Ukrainian products will be able to enter the southeastern market and return money to the state economy. This agreement provides Ukraine with political and economic support in relations with the Philippines, Malaysia, Indonesia, Singapore, Brunei Darussalam, Vietnam, Laos, Myanmar, Cambodia.
Yeah, and talking about the Asian region, many experts make some parallels between Ukraine and Taiwan. What about the relationship with this country?
Yes, Volodymyr, Taiwan helps us very much in our fight for freedom. We got a lot of help from people living there. Moreover, it is our promising trade partner with which we need to develop bilateral relations. And by the way, this is what deputies of Verkhovna Rada do. In particular, Mykola Kняжицький. Taiwan provided Ukraine with more than $30 million in humanitarian aid and joined the sanctions against Moscow. Already on February 28th, Taiwan sent 27 tons of medical materials to Ukraine. Through a special fund, $33 million were collected to help Ukrainians. On February 25, Taiwan introduced sanctions against Russia and in the spring expanded the list by banning the export of a number of high-tech products, including microchips, lasers, navigation systems. And the brave warriors from Taiwan also help us to defend our freedom because they know very well the cost of this freedom. A Taiwanese man who volunteered to fight in Ukraine has died on the battlefield. Jonathan Tseng is believed to be the first person from the island killed in the war. He was injured during combat in the eastern city of Luhansk and died from blood loss. Tseng's death came as a shock to Taiwan, in part because the involvement of Taiwanese volunteers in the Ukrainian International Legion and other forces has largely gone unnoticed. Taiwanese media reports that about 10 fighters from the island joined the fight. Tseng arrived in Ukraine in June and 2 months ago joined the Karpatska Sich battalion. And before that, he completed 5 years of Taiwanese military training. Rest in peace.
Yeah, rest in peace, the real hero. So, as far as I'm concerned, we do have the throughout support from all over the world, almost. But at this stage, do we really need to start the negotiations with Russia?
Volodymyr, that's exactly what I want to ask my guest. This is former ambassador, U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, Mr. John Herbst. Mr. Herbst, greetings and thank you for joining us. Mr. Herbst, Western leaders more often start saying that Ukraine needs negotiations with Russia. Right now, do we need them? And if so, under which conditions?
Eventually, this war of Russian aggression will be resolved through a diplomatic process. But right now, Moscow's aim is still to impose its political will on Ukraine. So Russia's not interested in a real negotiation. And Ukraine is conducting a successful counteroffensive in the east and the south. And the United States and the West should provide all the weapons Ukraine needs to make that counteroffensive as successful as possible. Once Ukraine has taken a lot more territory back from Russia, Putin may realize that he must make peace on just terms. But right now, he's only interested in negotiations in which Ukraine would give him land that he has conquered, and that's unacceptable.
What are the best negotiations for Ukraine right now? Is this Ukrainian armed forces or maybe negotiations with Russia someday, somehow?
Look, there has been some loose talk from people who don't understand what Putin's objectives are about negotiations. The right course for us is to continue our military support for Ukraine to continue its counteroffensive, and then to see if Russia is willing to negotiate at some point on a fair basis its withdrawal from the territories of Ukraine, which it has taken first this year and then, for that matter, going back to 2014.
Okay. And is the West getting tired from helping us? What do you think?
I think, by and large, Western support for Ukraine remains strong. There was some talk about the Trump wing of the Republican Party doing well in this election and insisting on dropping American assistance. But the Republicans did not do very well in the elections, and the Trump wing of the Republican Party did even worse. So I am confident that American support for Ukraine over the next 2 years will continue at least as strong as it is today. I would like us to do more, but I think at a minimum, we will not do less.
So you say that we really have this bipartisan support from the U.S. Congress right now?
Yes. I mean, look, in the vote earlier this year, it's true that 25% of Republicans did not agree to send this large aid package to Ukraine, but 75%, which is a very large number, did agree.
Okay. Mr. Herbst, let's talk a little bit about Poland, about this incident in Poland. And it showed that West is a little bit hesitant in responding to Russia, to Russian threats. Why?
Well, I mean, I'm not shy about criticizing the United States or other Western countries if I feel their policies are weak. But it seems that what fell in Poland was the Ukrainian-launched rocket, not a Russian-launched rocket. If that's true, I don't see anything weak about the Polish or the NATO or the American response to this. I think the response was appropriate.
Okay, thank you very much. This was John Herbst, former U.S. ambassador to Ukraine. So this is all for today. See you next week. And now back to you, Volodymyr.
Thank you once again for the good review and deep analytics about the world politics this week. Thank you, Yuriy Fizer, our global news editor. Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Latest news, trends, and analytics on all about Ukraine. Like, share, and subscribe. Any questions, proposals, and comments, contact us via email.